Oh, welcome and thank you for joining us in episode 29 of Podcast Tips with Rob Greenlee. We're going to deep dive tonight in the topic of the power of story. So thank you so much, like I said, for joining me. This story that we're going to do, this topic around story is related to podcasting, but it also has something to do with video as well. And we've got a terrific guest to join us here. I'm going to pull up on the screen here in a minute, and her name is Reena Friedman-Watts, who brings a wealth of experience from her experience in her podcast called Better Call Daddy, and as a podcast host and former producer of the Jerry Springer Show in an earlier part of her life that I'm pretty sure shared a little bit. If you're not familiar with the Jerry Springer Show, we will share a little bit more about that, about why that show is unique, and maybe why it caused a little bit of a different experience for Reena along her path. This show is live every Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, X, and it's also a video and audio podcast as well. So stay with us and join us for a live Q&A that we're going to do at the end of the show. So I'll capture some questions that you have. So type in the word Q if it's a question into the comment field of your live video streaming platform, and we'll do our best to cover it toward the end of the program here. So I appreciate it. We have a growing community here of viewers to this program, and I'm also going to do a giveaway at the end of the show too for a StreamYard Puddles Duck, as well as a StreamYard mug as well. So type into the comment field hashtag the yard to actually enter into that. And I do have a little giveaway tool that the StreamYard platform has that enables me to capture all those entries with that hashtag. And I'll go into the tool right now and enable that. So as you type in the word hashtag the yard, that'll enter you into the giveaway that we will do at the end. So let's go ahead and bring up our guest into the program and get going on this topic. I'm really excited to have Reena join me tonight because this whole aspect of story is such an important thing. But Reena, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm here for the duck.
Yeah.
That's a cool giveaway.
Puddles is given away every night on this show, or every time I do the show, not every night. So I'm sure there's people out there that would love to get a shot every night for this, so they can put it behind on their background.
That is cool.
Yeah.
And one thing that you mentioned off camera was breaking the formula. Like your episode 30 you're going to do from Seattle, and it's going to have a little bit of a different feel. You know, I had another podcaster who David Hirsch. He reached out to me tonight, and he is going to do like a spinoff of some of his mastermind clients and community, where he's going to be interviewing some of them. And he said, do I start another podcast? Does that go along with the audience that I already have? And this is actually a common thing. I feel like podcasters, if they love podcasting, they have other ideas. Like you decided to do another podcast on trust, and you're now doing one on podcast tips. My whole thought is, I know another podcaster, Chaz Volk, he does one called the Bad Jew podcast. So he interviews all kinds of Jewish people. And then his other podcast that he had was like for his creative community and people in the film industry and entrepreneurship. And I'm like, I have lots of different sides of myself, and I think they all go together. So for me to like grow two brands at once, I put everything on my LinkedIn, whether I'm throwing an event, whether I'm hosting a podcast, whether I'm doing television production. I think it's all under one part of Reena.
Well, and it's all part of, creating content. It's all part of trying to connect with other people. And so a lot of the same principles apply. And I think that was really fascinating about, as I looked at your background and all the things that you've done, it is a little unique, right? And as we're in this time of how people are really, I think content creators are striving to capture attention from people out there. It's increasingly difficult because of the amount of content that's available and the amount of just noise in the marketplace. It's increasingly difficult for podcasters and even live streamers and video creators to, capture people's attention. And I guess one of the ways that I think it really works well is to tell a good story. And I've always said this for many years, and let me know what you think about this, is that really podcasting is really all about story. I mean, every aspect of it, no matter what show you're doing, really the only difference that I've been able to determine is how long the story is and what the story is, right?
Yeah.
And is it related to the topic that you're doing, or is it somehow building like an emotional connection with the audience, or whatever? But I know, as you think about storytelling and with your background, how do you see that in the context of kind of connecting with other people?
Great question. So there were some principles that I feel like I learned early on at the Jerry Springer show. Like the Jerry Springer show had a formula.
Hmm.
90% of the stories on that show were love triangles. They were cheating stories. So there's a husband, a wife, and a mistress, or a husband, a wife, and a stripper, a husband, a wife,
Yeah.
and a relative. And there was always a good guy, bad guy. And if you were the bad guy, you had to remain the bad guy. Like the audience is going to go after you, the audience is going to hate you, and you can't switch to the good guy. You kind of have to know your role.
Right.
And sometimes I messed that up, and another thing I learned too is you can't make people what they're not. So, you know, you can have
Oh,
a wild and crazy guest that is ready to go after the crowd and isn't bothered by the crowd and loves all the attention. And then you can have somebody that just is doing something really weird in a relationship, and you have to let them tell it in their own way and not try to make them go after the crowd. Because if they tell it in their own weird way, that's engaging enough.
right. Yeah. Well, that's true. And also, I think that show, and I watched that show quite a bit. It did engage with people's um, their attention, right? So it did kind of capture people at a place where they were emotional about it, or they could associate with what was being discussed there. Maybe if they were unlucky in their life, maybe with some of those stories, um, but it just resonated with people, and I think that's an interesting aspect of, of story that doesn't get talked a lot about too.
Yeah, it's so crazy because it really was like the start of reality TV. Like people
Yeah.
wanted their 15 minutes of fame and they were willing to bear all to get it.
Right, and it seems like we're kind of that's almost institutionally accepted now, isn't it?
And what else is
I mean, if
interesting
you
is
think
I
about it.
think the best stories are the people with no filter.
Right.
If you ask somebody a question, they give you a one-line response, you're like, "Okay, that's gonna be painful to get that story out." And,
Yeah.
like, one theme of my show is the daddy angle, like, that is kind of now part of my formula, so if I say, "Hey, what's your relationship with your dad like?" And they're like, "I don't wanna talk about that." I'm like, "Okay, so this might not really be the show for you." Like, work through that and call me back, like, you gotta at least speak to that a little bit more than that, you know?
Yeah, I think it does kinda pull on people's kind of emotional strings, because it's like it forces people to think about their perspectives of their dad, and that can be either positive or negative, right? I mean, it doesn't always and it may be along a spectrum in their life experience too. So how do you I mean, how did you come up with that idea of bringing your dad in there to do like a critique of sorts? And that's kind of what he does, but oftentimes that is kind of the role of a dad, isn't it?
Well, he also really synthesizes my thoughts well,
Right.
and I feel very comfortable around him, and I think if you're gonna have a co-host, that's kind of the role. It's like they add additional synthesis or they're able to add on to what you're saying and really bring out who you are, and so my dad has always been that for me.
Mhm.
Um, he was an entrepreneur, he worked with his parents for 40 plus years, he's stayed married, he is a good dad, a good sibling. He's taking care of his parents. I felt like he had a lot of the values that I feel like society could use. And so I wanted to kind of share like how he's helped me in my own life. And I felt like that could help other people. And then, are there other daddy's girls? Are there other inspirational fathers? Or is there anybody that would like to have a relationship like I have with my dad? And then you can connect in that way. And like, are you into that? Or does that make you uncomfortable? Do you want to talk about that it makes you uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, and so, I mean, your thinking with that show was definitely outside of the box, and it does make me wonder about the influence that you've had in your career and why you made that choice.
Well, truthfully, I was working for a top podcaster, Kathy Heller, and I was booking her huge guests, and I was
Uh,
part of, putting on big events with her where I helped her get like
mhm.
350 people to an event, and I was, uh, helping all the speakers in the green rooms and announcing her on stage and all of these things. And my dad was in LA, like on business. And I was 7 months pregnant working her event. And my dad was like, he knew I had had a miscarriage in the past. So he was like, I'll be your production assistant. I'll help you put out all the schlock. I'll help you put out all the snacks. I'll be your slave. I'm going to show up for you. And so I knew that my dad wouldn't let me down. Like, he's literally who I call. He was okay with me working at Jerry Springer. He thought that chapter was cool. He was okay with me flying out to LA 7 months pregnant, but he literally is who I call for life advice, work advice, friend advice, probably a little. I mean, I probably drive my husband crazy with, relationship advice, all these things. So I just felt like there really wasn't too many subjects that I couldn't cover with him, and he's a total character. He's always wanted his own show. So I thought, truthfully, I kind of modeled it after the Jerry Springer thing. I was like, I'll bring all of these shock and awe type of stories, and then my dad could be the final thought. He can give his 2 cents, and then whoever I interview can ask my dad a question about life, about their own life, about relationships, about a work struggle that they're having. My dad is like hired and fired hundreds of people. He ran a successful business. He's hired people out of jail. He's let people sleep on his couch. He's a contributing member of society. I just felt like, and he's just like a street person. He talks to everyone. So I thought that would add a nice real element, and it would make me more in my own element.
Yeah, so how long have you been doing the show? Just
With
curious.
my dad, 4
Yeah.
years, and then I co-hosted another show prior, and like I said, I've worked for multiple other podcasters, and I've produced 2 healthcare podcasts, one live in person, which was managing like a 3-camera shoot, helping book the guests, helping script it, helping brief the host, helping manage the web team. So I was doing that alongside producing my own show. So I felt like as I was growing, I was able to like help others grow.
Mhm. So how has the podcasts, kind of evolved over time on this? I mean, have you found yourself I recently did an interview with you as well, and you g I don't even know how you did this, but you got me to talk about things that I've never talked about on a podcast before. So I wasn't quite sure what kind of, magic or something like that you were doing in your lead in, or how you were the questions that you were asking me, but you definitely unlocked some thoughts that I had, that I hadn't shared with you before the actual interview. So I thought it was interesting.
That's my favorite. That's actually like the biggest compliment. And the way that I do that, or a little piece of my secrecy, is that I do a lot of research beforehand. If somebody has a podcast, I listen to it. If somebody's been interviewed on other shows, I try to listen to that. I also see how they respond to things on Twitter. Like, what are their replies? What are they posting on their Instagram? Who's
Mhm.
recommended this person on LinkedIn? Can you reach out to those people and ask them for a question? Who do you know in common that might be able to give you a curveball? All of those things make your line of questioning so much more
Oh, interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
And then also, like, leave room for magic. Like, don't be so tied to your questions. If you wanna know more about something that someone just said, just be like, "Oh my god, that's interesting. Tell me more about that."
Yeah, I mean, you have to listen too, right? And I think that's the key thing here is that, if you wanna have a flow of a conversation that's more organic, kinda like this, I created an outline for this show for our discussion, but every time I do this, I almost never follow it. So it's just one of those things that, conversations, and that's what I want to create here is a conversation with you, not so much a scripted, every question that I have is like mechanical and pre-planned and pre-contemplated because I might be able to find those existential conversations out of you too that I wouldn't have normally thought of beforehand, right? Just
Yeah,
like you did with
yeah.
me, just like you did with me.
Is that a goal? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not a bad goal, and if you're a podcaster, I guess it depends on your goal with your show and what you're trying to accomplish, but I think it is one of those things, I do so many interviews on other people's podcasts, and it's one things that I pretty much tell everybody is that, try not to ask me the same questions I get asked on every podcast, right? Because then it puts me in a position where I have to, be very redundant to things that I've talked about in the past, and I do think that that is a hindrance for a couple of reasons. It's a hindrance from the guests to share the show with their community because then it's like, if I share the same content to my community 10 times, then they're going to be like going, well, it's just going to be another one or Rob talking about this or that. And what's unique about it. And I think that's what was really interesting about what you did is you got me talking about things that I'm thinking about more recently about what's happening in the world and how technology is changing our world and how our perceptions are being, kind of changed by that. And it's just an interesting topic that you brought out of me talking about, life after death. And those are things that I usually never get asked on a podcast, as you might imagine, because I always talk about podcasting. So,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the life after death thing because you said that you had never met your grandmother and that you
right.
thought it would be interesting to be able to communicate with her. And, I have this podcast with my dad, and with all of the technology now, I can literally transcribe every episode via AI, and AI can probably tell me like, how would my dad answer this guest? Whether my dad's on the conversation or not, I now have over 370 episodes of my dad and how he's responded to different subject matters. If AI is becoming predictive, I could actually interview a guest and, when my dad's not around anymore, I could do like AI daddy response. And I've always been like, how long is this podcast going to go? I guess, when my dad no longer wants to like be my final thought. But truthfully, I it I could make, a spin on the show. I could do a plot twist. I could have AI daddy answer, and that might be interesting too. In fact, I could have an AI Reena.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, and you can actually create a clone of yourself, right? So it is possible to do that. It's just giving it the context it needs to be able to share what it is. And increasingly, it's becoming an issue in podcasting too. Is how do we all use AI, especially around cloning of our voices? Are there aspects of it? And I've got some friends that are playing around with it too, trying to augment various parts of their production to utilize their same voice, but have it produced as AI. And I know that the advertising industry is playing around with this too, as you might imagine. They're always pushing the envelope on trying to make things easier. But I do kind of think about a lot the aspect of you know being genuine and being real too. And I don't know, I suppose if what the AI says came from me, then it's just the AI just voicing it, right? Versus, but it's really my content, right? But but if the AI generates the words that are created by the AI and it generates me speaking at it, then I think we're in a different level of lacking in human, authenticity. I don't know. Do you ever think about that, Rena?
Yeah, in fact, you know, if I send somebody my bio and they're gonna introduce me on a podcast, like, how do you feel about asking Meta AI who is Reena Friedman-Watts? And how do you feel about a podcaster like reading that verbatim? Do you feel like there's copyright issues with that? I was thinking about that. And then alongside that, I would love to collaborate with an AI Beyonce. and like be able to sing with her. I was thinking about that just a second ago. Like she sings all the single ladies, and I'm like all the married ladies. And like it'd be funny if I could do like an AI collaboration with like a musical artist that I like. But I think that there's going to be rules to
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna be as easy in the future to take other people's voice and use them in your podcast, or
I think
in
it's
any
yeah.
content, right?
It's pretty free right now, but I think there's probably going to be regulations around it. Do you think so too?
Yeah, I think, well, if AI is as intelligent as we hope it is, that it will be able to, detect that and limit your ability to do such things. So, I guess it depends on if we have dumb AI or if we have smart AI. It's or a version of AI that's about, doing unethical things. So, I think that's the tug of war that's going on here. And I didn't want to necessarily make this show all about AI, but it's just how these tools are being used to maybe enhance or improve our ability to create content and create story. And if AI or these large language models can be used to help, create a better story, then that's kind of an interesting idea. I know a couple podcasters that are doing that, and they're using clone voices as well. And but they're the context of what they're saying with their clone voices is really based on their own beliefs and their own thoughts. So if the words are specifically written by AI, it may not be misplaced. It's just, it's not being generated by them on a microphone. So I think that's where the gray area comes into here is how are we going to record these things? And is it going to have to have a flag on it that says this was generated by AI, or it's going to have some sort of a watermarking on it that says that it wasn't voiced by a human. Um, but
Wow.
but but yeah, let's back up and talk about what are the specific aspects of creating engaging content right now. I mean, I think as we see about how divisive the world is right now, at least politically and ideologically and socially, I think it does kind of play into certain kind of extreme narratives. But is the era that we're in right now about extreme kind of thoughts as the foundation of story, or do you think that there's some other aspect of it that I'm not referring to here that's more like human, I suppose?
That's such a great question. I do think shock and awe gets a lot of eyeballs.
Well, think of Jerry Springer, right? I mean, those
Yes.
extreme relationship conflicts got people. I mean, there were guests on that show that were throwing chairs at each other, right?
Yeah, I mean, there when we would brief the guests, we would say to them, "There's no happy endings here." Like, that was actually part of the formula. And the twist on my show is that I can tell these wild and crazy stories. Like, I interviewed a guy that went from, being in the KKK and being white power to now going through a Jewish conversion and actually wanting to stop the hate. And talking to him about that, I still wanted him to tell me, like, a mean Jew joke that he had told in the past, because that's a shocking thing that he did, but I also wanted to commend him for the good work that he's doing now. I think it's okay to have a happy ending, but I also think, if you want to have the viral tagline, you've gotta talk about how bad it was before you overcame this.
Yeah, and I think we're certainly increasingly seeing that with the content that's being produced, that it's taking a position in the world, right? It's taking a certain kind of, um, I guess, position, narrative, however you want to say it. And those shows appear to be, at least the ones that I've noticed on YouTube and in podcasting, are they can be fairly divisive, and it rallies people around a certain kind of belief or anger. Those are all, not tangible things. They're kind of uh, related to feelings. Um, but I also think that, like you did with me on your podcast, is I wasn't talking about divisive topics, even though you could probably imply somehow that my belief in or my thinking that it's possible that our brains might and the information our brains might live beyond our life may be considered a little bit on the extreme side. But but where do you think we are in that realm right now with podcasting and with online video? Are things going to get more extreme, do you think?
I think they are. I mean, I was a part of a panel last night, and it was about dating, which was really interesting because there were 2 single guys, and then there was a married gay guy, and then I'm
Mhm.
17 years into marriage. And, you know, when people start dating, they have, like, these list of things that they want, and I feel like with how divided society is right now, like, it's not just would you marry a Democrat or a Republican, but it's like you have to define all of your values and how you vote and whether you got vaccinated and where you want to send your kids to school and all of these things. So that's why it's good to get married young where you don't have as many expectations.
Yeah, I do think that I think increasingly our society is kind of pushing us towards taking a position, right?
Yes.
And if we take a position, that's going to potentially put us in a situation where we can rally like maybe a community around that position, right? That these communities are built around a certain belief structure, and I guess that was the gamble that I took when I talked about the things I talked about on your podcast was, are is there a certain percentage of people out there that are going to think poorly of me that I think those things, right? Or is there going to people that will rally behind me and say, yeah, 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 you know, that I believe in. But at the end of the day, it's about belief. It's not about necessarily fact.
Are you
Right.
okay with having haters? Are you okay with people thinking you're weird? And I honestly think if you want to be an influencer or to have the bigger the following, the more haters or the more people that are going to disagree with you. I did hear like some sort of statistic like, 50% of people are going to love you and 50% of people are like going to be indifferent towards you or not like you. And I think that if you're putting yourself out there, you have to like know like the bigger your community gets, like you're going to get more people that disagree with you. And are you ready for that? Do you want that? Maybe you don't. And then you can play it safe, or maybe you can like baby step into sharing more. I've interviewed now over 370 people, and I'm a lot more comfortable talking on the mic or just hopping on conversations live because I know my talking points and I know how to self edit and I know what I'm comfortable sharing. And sometimes when people are open books and they push the envelope a little bit, just like on Jerry Springer, it's like if they're willing to lift up their shirt, you're willing to lift up your shirt too. So be careful who you're willing to have conversations with because they might rub off on you.
Yeah, I think that there is an increasing desire to try and fit in with a particular perspective out there. I mean, I feel a lot of pressure to take a position that may be kind of more favorable to a certain community. I even apply this to the podcast community to some degree. I mean, there are different positions in the industry at all times, and it used to be in the past where you express a different opinion about something, and that was always seen as a constructive thing to do, right? It was always like, well, that's a new idea, or that's an interesting idea. Let's think a little bit more about that. But now it's like people just like decide uh, right away it's good or bad, and then if they don't agree with it, then they kind of attack you. So it's it's really kind of an interesting difference. And do you sense that too with your own podcast, with some of your guests as well in the topics? Do you get comments about various things that are discussed on your show that are surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, this dating show, for instance, it was funny
Yeah.
because they said, in dating, you should steer away from politics, from religion. And
It's
I
kind of hard
said,
to do. Yeah.
actually, I think that you need to talk about those things. Like, are you open to dating any religion?
Yeah.
Right? Because, you know, another question that I asked too is like, how do you know you're ready for marriage? How do you know you're ready for kids? Not only is it like working out your junk and like healing and like really thinking about how you were raised, but like how many of your family members do you want involved in your life? How do you want to raise your kids? Like all of that stuff is going to come creeping in, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
I
I
was
mean,
like, you better put that all out there if you're thinking about having a serious relationship. Yeah, I don't
yeah.
think you should avoid those topics.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that there is such a thing as being stealth about this stuff, right? And not sharing it because maybe you don't want to upset the cart, whatever. I know during the COVID pandemic, there was a lot of families that got divided. Those that got the vaccine, those that didn't, and they didn't see eye to eye, and there was a lot of kind of contrast around that. And it does seem that we're seeing it in political lines as
Oh
well,
yeah.
and other social justice issues too. I mean, increasingly we're seeing more and more of this. But I guess as a podcaster, you have to really think about that and understand that maybe you're playing into a certain narrative by even expressing your own thoughts. I'm not sure that it's, and let me know what you think about this too. I'm not sure that sharing your honest beliefs or your honest thoughts is always a good thing to do.
Oh, no, I've had to edit my own dad, and I know there's certain topics that are better not to cover,
Right. Yeah.
because like, our intention, isn't to be divisive,
Hmm.
and if it's something that but we have pushed even the envelope with that. My dad has not agreed with every guest that we've had, like, one example of that is, we covered like the subject of pedophilia. First of all, I would never even think to talk about that with my dad, but I interviewed a guy who was a counselor to abusers,
Hmm.
and he's done a lot of research around rehabilitating people that do that under 21 years of age. He's saying that if you meet with a counselor before 21 years old, that you can be rehabilitated. And in my dad's experience, he's never seen abusers be rehabilitated. So my dad
Oh,
expressed that in the reaction, and then my guest felt like my dad was like discounting everything that he said, and it wasn't that he was discounting it. It
you said
was
a different
just
belief, right?
a completely different belief, and
Hmm.
maybe I should have, I don't know. I'm okay with like agreeing to disagree, but the guest felt offended that my dad wasn't really open to his research.
Yeah. So do you, when you research a guest, like you were talking about us earlier, do you actually put some of that research into your show notes, or do you just do it for like background information? So when you have a discussion with someone, it's just kind of like in the back of your head that you can pull from if it's appropriate.
That's
Um,
a
and-
great question. Yeah, I haven't really like I could have actually attached this guy's research or paper, a link to articles he's
Mhm.
written, and that might be a good thing to go back and do. Let people draw their own conclusions. Maybe I could even do a follow-up episode from how another counselor might present the same information.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
a great idea.
I mean, because I kind of do that too with this show too. Is that I'll kind of have a perception of what the guest is that I have and the topic that I have. Um, and, s- and, and sometimes the topic will run out of juice early and some of it will seem like it's endless in its discussion. And it's like there's no way to unpack all the aspects of things in the amount of time we have. Like I usually do like maybe an hour and 15 minutes with the show. And it seems like some of the topics I've gotten into with this show just go beyond. It's like I could easily go like a 3-hour show. And I know a lot of podcasts will do that. I mean, you look at like a Joe Rogan podcast, or you look at, some of the biggest video programs on YouTube, and some of them are 2.5 hours long because they really deep dive into the topic. And I think that's an interesting aspect of this. And I'm constantly, I don't know if you feel this too, but I constantly feel pressure to make things shorter.
Oh, definitely. Actually, this panel I was on last night, it went 3 hours, and one of the guys dropped off at the hour, and I was like, "Well, I have a little bit longer," but I didn't realize it was gonna go 2 more hours. So I was like, "Oh, man, maybe I should have dipped out at the same time." Because even my dad, like, my dad only wants to listen to a segment that's, like, between 30 minutes to an hour, and, I was on a couple podcasts today, and we're all trying to get it in under an hour. Unless you have, like, somebody that can really present new information, new research, hasn't told stories before, I think an hour is really max.
And I see a lot of these bigger, I don't know if they're bigger shows, but just kind of shows that appear to be much more pre-planned. They're just recorded. They're not actually live shows. They're actually able to do an extensive recording, and then they can go in and do editing of it, and then they can pull out aspects of it and create like lead-ins that tease different topics in the content. And I think that's a big trend with these long form YouTube kind of experiences, is being able to tease those topics to get people to continue to listen. So do you ever do that with some of your content too? Is that you will tease at the beginning some of the things that are talked about? Like a good example would be the conversation that I had, learn about, um, life beyond, your physical life or something. I mean, just kind of teasing those things.
Yeah, so the formula that I've kind of now kept to, I do sometimes break the formula. Like recently, I did some live events at a trade show,
Hmm.
but I interview the guest. I like it to be extremely conversational and unscripted.
Hmm.
Then I share that with my dad, and we come up with our own reaction to it. And then from how my dad responds to the guest or the question or the episode, then I formulate my intro. So, yes, I do like to kinda tie in what my dad's gonna say and what we discuss in the episode, but I also like having my dad's input. Like, what did he think the main point of the whole conversation that we had was? I actually love my dad's synthesis of my thoughts, and I feel like his thoughts really complement mine well.
Yeah, and I thought, I was a little bit kind of scared in the episode I did with you. It was like, well, what's your dad gonna say?
And other guests have said that to me too. It's almost like they want my dad's approval, but I always worry too. I'm like, "Oh, no," because 'cause I've had a couple that, my dad, like, offends them, like, not just the counselor to the abuser one, but I had on this sperm donor daddy. He was like a sperm donor to, like, 25 kids, and
Oh
my
my
dad
goodness.
actually wanted more kids, and my mom got her tubes tied at, like, 25, 26. She was done after 3 kids, having them young. And my dad wanted more kids, so he thought about doing that selfishly. But after we interviewed this guy, he was like, "No, that he's doing that for selfish reasons. He's not doing that to better the world." Like, and somebody actually messaged me, set up a private email, and was like, "Your dad was spot on." And they created like an email just to message me that and like told me this. I was like, "Hey, do you want to be a follow-up episode?" But like they wouldn't. So they had an interaction with this guy that went south and didn't end up using him as the sperm donor, and they said that my dad pegged him perfectly. So that was actually great to be able to send to my dad because he and the guest got into it a little bit on Facebook, and I was like, "Dad, okay, you've made your point. This isn't gonna change, like, let it go. This is just a podcast." And it's similar to even the audience at Jerry Springer. They get so invested in these stories that, like, offended them, that some of the audience members would come up on stage and wanna fight, and the security guards are like, "You can't do that, and this is just a story, and sit back down," and,
Yeah, I kind of wonder with the extreme behavior that we're seeing in the world right now that you could even do a Jerry Springer show anymore,
I
right?
am telling you, so part of this dating panel thing that I was on last night, this guy was talking about his narcissistic mom, but I'm like, dude, you're 39, you're still living with your mom. If she's putting a roof over your head, you might not want to call her that if you want to bring a girl over. Like, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right. Yeah. So, I mean, because let's say someone did a show like this. Do you know of any other shows that are on video or television or anything like that, or anything like what you worked on back then? And why do you think that genre didn't continue if you don't think of any?
Well, I think Howard Stern has recycled a lot of Jerry Springer guests.
Oh,
Actually, there's a guy that I booked on Springer. His name is Jeff Levy, and he was really into girls throwing up on him. He's called the Vomit Guy. Stern has had him on like 6 times. Yeah. I do think Stern is a version of Springer. I was actually like, I recently thought about contacting the Stern Show and saying like, "Hey, I'm bulimic. Can you put me in touch with that guy?" Because I thought it'd be fun to do an update story. I have actually interviewed some people on my podcast that were my Springer guests. I thought that would be fun to like catch up with them 20 years later. But I did remember that this Jeff Levy guy like literally used to call me like every couple of days. Like I couldn't get rid of him. So it was probably better that the Stern Show didn't respond to me.
yeah. I think that there is another show that's been a little bit similar to that, and that's the Dr. Phil program, right?
I actually have a friend that was recently on my show. So speaking of controversial topics, she is an opinion editor at Newsweek, and
Mm-hmm.
she was on Dr. Phil, and she was on what is it? Bill Maher.
Bill
Her name
Maher.
is Batia Unger Sargon, and I wanted to cover the Israel-Palestine conflict, but I didn't feel knowledgeable enough to present it in kind of like a bipartisan way. And she was very much able to speak to that. And also,
Mhm.
my husband was like a huge fan of her father's in Chicago. So we actually knew them personally. So I've done very few episodes on Israel, but I do really appreciate how she was able to present the information. And I felt like it was important for me to interview somebody who could speak to it in a knowledgeable way.
Yeah, I think it is a very touchy subject that's very complex, and I fear that many people view it very simplistically when it's not as
Yes.
simple as people like to think it is.
Yeah.
And it goes back for so many centuries that there's so much history there that most people don't understand. I don't profess to understand it, so that's why I don't ever talk about it.
And I've had friends reach out to me and they're like, "What the hell is going on at college campuses? Like, why is that happening?" And I'm like, there's more than one reason, but that might actually be interesting to cover. But again, if you cover that, then depending on who you interview, you are siding with a side,
Right,
unless you interview a newscaster who has to be bipartisan.
right. Yeah, well,
If
I don't
this
know if
message gets pinned, I'm gonna be happy. That's awesome. That's the best comment. That deserves a
I know,
pin.
that's why I pulled it up there. It's like, well, because the same person wrote, "Stop putting my messages on the screen" a few seconds ago. So I think that there's a change in view of the person's content, I think is what was going on there.
I wanna actually bring up another reality star person that we both know. So Rob Cisternino, who you've
Oh,
also
yeah.
collaborated with, I
Well, I've
worked
had
with.
him on the show, right.
Yes. Yeah, I listened to that. So I worked with him in like 2006. That guy is amazing, and it's so funny, he went from working in reality TV to really getting in on the podcasting game early,
Mhm.
and that was really cool to watch that whole evolution. And you too, like you've been doing the podcasting journey from very early. We worked on a show that was a bunch of reality stars living in a house together, getting an opportunity to star in a Hollywood feature.
Right.
So it was people from like Big Brother and Survivor and all of those early shows. They were living in a house, like Johnny Fairplay was one of them. And he was hooking up with all of these girls in the house, and we had cameras on all of these contestants like 24/7 in order to create the story, because if you have
Right.
cameras on people long enough, just the drama is going to create itself. And it was a 24-hour operation for like 7 weeks. And then we filmed the making of them trying to actually act and be in a movie. The reality show of them all living together in the house was the most drama. That was even better than the movie they tried to create. So the show was called Kill Reality, and then the B movie that they made was called Scorned. And there was two different production teams. One was like the making of the movie, and then one was like all of the drama happening in the house.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, it's interesting how I think about this. Here, let me pull myself up here a little bit again too. Yeah, I wanted to pull up on the screen for those that maybe are not that familiar with the Jerry Springer show. I can pull it up on the screen here so you can see. Jerry passed away back in what, 2023? Is that right?
Yes.
And
It's been about a year now.
yeah, so he has a website up there too that has a bunch of his old videos, and I guess he's still in syndication. So if you wanted to go check that out, it's just at
So actually, that story that you just pulled up, Zach, the 70-pound baby, I saw that he got a happy ending with Jerry too. He got to reconnect with Jerry 20 years later, and I interviewed Zach.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't
Yes.
know if I can actually legally play this, but
okay, our next guest, I gotta tell you, is a blast from the past. For all of our diehard fans out there who have been with us since the very beginning, which was 27 years ago, boy, do we have a treat. Because today we have a special guest. And the last time he was on our show, he was, and those of you old enough will remember this, he was a 70-pound baby. Take a look at this video. My guest today has been on TV, he's been in the newspapers and magazines, and he's definitely become an international celebrity. And all at the ripe old age of 18 months. In fact, the entire world has been captured by the story of Zach, the 70-pound baby. Now, before we meet Zach, let's take a look at what daily life is like for this oversized.
I didn't want to play the whole thing, so
Yeah. So I caught up with him, and it was really cool because I also got to interview Jerry like a year before he passed away. And so I felt like we both kind of got that like happy ending. Like he really wanted to thank Jerry for like helping. Jerry helped him find like a geneticist and like figure out why he was a 70-pound baby, and like followed up with him after the show and like tried to help him and his family. And that is something that, a lot of people don't know about Jerry, is that he actually did that with people he took a special interest in. He was a philanthropist in a lot of ways. So that was cool to find out behind the scenes. And yeah, I connected to his mom as well. I'm like, I had a 30-pound baby and that was backbreaking. Like I literally had back problems from like how chubby my kid was. I don't know how I would have gotten a 70-pound baby like in and out of
how
the
did
crib.
that work?
Yeah,
right.
it's so God bless his mother. But yeah, he found out that he had like giantism. And he's really struggled with that throughout his life. And then he talked about how he's overcome a lot of weight challenges and body image stuff. And that was really interesting just to hear how Jerry made a difference in his life. And then I also caught up with at the time we called her a midget, but now she's a little person. And she was a guest that I booked over 20 years ago. We've kept in touch through Facebook, and I ended up just catching up with her and finding out what she remembered from her experience of being on the show and then being one of our craziest guests and getting to go to Jamaica. And it was hard enough. I think it was her first flight. Like she was afraid to fly. And I think the first time we got her out to the show, she might have even like taken a train. And yeah, so it was my first time to Jamaica, like the only time I've ever been there, and just like, what was that experience like? What stayed with her? What did she remember about the people she was on the show with? What happened to them? It's just crazy to be able to catch up with people who you spent that kind of crazy, wild experience with.
Yeah, so if you look at that clip that we shared and just the thought process behind it, What do you think is a good takeaway for a podcaster to think about from the standpoint of what they would do with their show? I mean, is it trying to find kind of unique aspects like you did with me? Um, and then I guess the only way to really do that is to do deep research, and to think outside of the box a little bit, because you didn't really ask me any questions. So
I just
that
had to
was
poke the bear. And that's the thing with
right.
Zach. It was like, wow, you caught up with Jerry 20 years later. So did I. Take me back. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like you don't even have to know that many details about it, but like he got to do that, I got to do that. That was establishing like common ground and then share. And even when I interviewed Jerry himself, I was like, God, this guy's been interviewed a zillion times. What is going to make my interview unique? The fact that I've actually shared an office with the guy. So like bring up specifics
Yeah.
from the office, from the time I spent with him. I spent 9/11 in NBC Tower, and so did he.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
you
So you
got to
have a
find those
common
uniqueness.
experience
Yes.
with him that maybe gave you a glimpse into his thinking on how he did this. I'm just still shocked that there's so few people doing similar types of content, but I guess there are examples of it, that I can think of to some degree, but none that I recall really that involved, people throwing chairs at each other and getting into fistfights on stage, because I think that that's kind of what happened on that show, right?
Well, another comparison I think that is trendy are like people that are trolling. These trolling videos are really popular. So like going to a
Mm.
protest and like
Oh,
saying
like
the
a
complete opposite.
TikTok or something, like a TikTok video or a shorts of some sort?
Yes, I do see people making that kind of content. That's really popular.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, I had on Alex Stein, primetime 99 Alex Stein, and this guy films himself going to like local government meetings and calling out government officials for different hypocrisies that he can point out. And he's exercising his free speech and he's videoing it and he's pushing people's buttons and people love that. I mean, he has doubled his following, but he too worked on the show Cheaters, so he
Oh,
loves the drama, he gets the drama, he plays to the drama. And he's been spit on, he's had coffees thrown at him, he's been flicked off. He loves it. He makes reels of that. He's a button pusher. I'm not as daring. I will
right.
cover controversial topics and topics that will make you think, but I don't want the hate.
Yeah, and I think even Joe Rogan's a good example of that too. I mean, he comes from a background, he did a TV show,
Fear factor.
what was called Fear Factor, right? And that was about extreme experiences too that were very emotional and
I had a
re
friend that was
or
on that.
reactive.
That
Okay.
that worked with me at Jerry Springer. She was a Jerry Springer producer. Her name is Gina Huerta. Actually, her episode went in like his craziest episodes. She had like this crazy gag reflex. And I don't know if you remember, they used to have to eat disgusting things
Oh, yeah, I
on
remember
the
that.
show, like raw, like Liver King style. That's another controversial guy, Liver King, where he's eating like cow testicles and things, like really disgusting things. So she was like, it was down to her and one other. And she was eating it and trying to get it done in like the 10 seconds she had or whatever. And her gag reflexes were making everyone around her like almost gag too. It was
Oh,
so
really?
good. But yeah, like it's very memorable. And I think that's another piece to good storytelling is memorable things. Like what do people remember and love about the stories that you tell and try to somehow weave some of those in.
Yeah, and it's easy for that type of content can kinda get lost in the content too, and that's really where the power of using these social tools that we have now increasingly, like the shorts and things like that, and you did that with our interview too. You created a short that highlighted some of my more extreme statements that I made, and then created some transitions and animations around it to kinda symbolize the extreme views that I was sharing. And did that short pick up quite a bit of viewership?
Yes,
Just
it
curious.
did. Yes, it did well. And there's tools now. This is another thing I wanted to bring up earlier where we were talking about AI and, you know, you turn on Zoom and there's an AI tool like that can tell you how engaged the other party was. And are you going to let AI dictate like the questions that you want to ask or how long you speak? Like it can tell you how many minutes you spoke versus how many minutes they spoke and how was your sentiment and how is the engagement rating, and are you going to be changed by what Zoom thinks of you, by what AI thinks of you?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question that I think all of us are being, increasingly influenced by.
And
There's
even
no question.
video technology too that creates those clips like video.ai and Opus clips. I use both of those.
Uh-huh.
They can tell you like what's the caption, what's the text, what clip is going to rate better, and I pay attention to all of that. And it will even cut in the B-roll for you where you don't even have to find the clips that accompany what the guest is saying. It will
Hmm.
even put in the B-roll clips for you, or you could do it with or without it, but it suggests that you do it. All these tools, are they going to be assets or are they going to take away from creativity?
I think in the case of what you did, like with the short clip that you made of our interview, I think it added something to it. I don't think it took anything away from it because
It was like
what you
accentuating your
shared was
point.
what we actually said.
Yeah,
So, I mean, all it was doing was adding some visual elements to it.
right. And do you need that though? Do you have to have that? And I think that
I
you
think
should
it
maybe even
helps.
test it.
I
I
think it yeah, I mean, testing it, I think, is
do
a
one
smart
with,
idea.
one without. See which does
Yeah.
better, but there's also so many factors in what does better. Like what time did you post it? What was the caption? You can A/B test everything. You'll go crazy
Well,
doing it.
and which platform you post it on too, right? Is a clip like that gonna do better on, a TikTok, or is it gonna do better on a YouTube? I think it like you say, there's a lot of variables there.
And now there's even technology that can tell you when to post on all of those platforms and what to say on all those platforms, and it will do it for you and you can schedule it.
Really? Okay.
I learned that today too from another podcaster. And that's another wonderful thing about collaborating with other podcasters because we are all constantly discovering new things. And I think that if you're going to podcast, you want to collaborate with people that have been doing it longer and people that are just starting and share what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, and that really gets back to the roots of the medium of podcasting. It was in the early days of it, it was very much of a sharing medium. Creators were sharing ideas with other creators, and people were, it's the same thing with like the early websites in the early days. People would cut and paste the code off of different people's websites and they would repurpose that into their own website. But nowadays that kind of stuff doesn't happen as much. But it was that kind of attitude in the early days that, word of mouth sharing is still one of the primary ways that people find a show to consume, right? People, like yourself, you talking about this new technology, if you were to share, well, it was this platform, then people watching this
I think
program
it's called Minvo.
would go
Have
over
you heard
there
of that?
and no, I haven't actually, but I think that there's a huge amount of new AI companies that I don't know about because there's just no way I can keep up with it all. So that's why I need somebody like you to spread the word.
Yeah, Jose Miguel Longo,
Yeah.
who interviewed me like 3 years ago, is rebranding his podcast. It was like a career podcast, and yeah, he got himself a podcast producer, and then he was like, "What tools do I need to cut down on my production time?" And so he bought that on AppSumo, which is another site I need to kind of comb through and see what are the latest, like, AI tools. I
Yeah.
did find out about Cast Magic through AppSumo, and he told me that there's one, I think it's called Minvo. I have to look it up, but that it will post to TikTok, YouTube, and other social media, and you can schedule it, and it tells you what to say and when to say it. So that's pretty cool. Did you find it? Oh, okay, that's mine.
No, I just
Better
wanted to
call
pull up
daddy.
I wanted to change the topic a little bit and talk a little about, because you're playing around with YouTube too.
Yeah.
You're
Yep.
posting content up there, and I was curious what your experience is, and kind of, I'm sure you're like everybody else, you're playing around with artwork up here and
Yeah.
thumbnails and things like that. And I'm just curious what you're finding. And, it does appear that you're playing around with different layouts and formats, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm constantly playing around with stuff too to see what works and what doesn't work. And you've got a lot of shorts in here too.
Yeah,
So
shorts do better. And if you're 1 second over the minute, then it goes into a video and then it doesn't do as well. So you're better
uh,
off keeping them to the shorts. That I
okay.
have learned that. And also, I had this one, the Leaving Scientology episode. That was someone who has been following me for about 5 years.
Hmm.
I met her through working for the other podcaster. She was part of that community, and she was like, "Hey, I've got a great story for you. This girl, Reese Quibble, her father got her into Scientology." And some of my best stories have come from my listeners, or, just telling somebody, "Hey, I love interviewing inspirational dads,
Hmm.
anybody with a little daddy drama, daddy's girls." I was at a meetup and I literally just said that. And then this guy was like, "Hey, my brother has a great daddy story. He quit his job. He got into a conference that was for all scientists just so he could meet the best scientists so that he could try to save his son." I was like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." And I ended up doing a pre-interview with this guy to just see what he was like and if we had good chemistry.
Hmm.
During our first pre-interview, Mozzie cried. He cried it all out. And he
Really?
didn't want
Right
sympathy.
on the show? You cried
Well,
it
in
out
the
right on
pre-interview,
in the
that was
pre-interview.
like before we sat down and actually like recorded the story live. He kind of wanted to give me a little of the background. He cried pretty much the whole hour. I loved it though. It was raw, it was
It was
real. It
real,
made me
right?
feel so connected to him. And then when we sat down, he gave me such a beautiful permission. He was like, "I don't want you to just see me as somebody that you should feel sorry for." He was like, "Treat me like any other interview where you're just curious
Hmm.
about my story." He was like, "Ask me all the uncomfortable questions." I was like, "Oh my God, that's cool." So I was able to ask him things like, "How rare is your son's disease? Like, one in how many?"
Hmm.
And he was like, "There's only one other reported case of what my son's deletion is, like his rare form of muscular dystrophy. There's only one other case in the entire world that's been reported." I was like, "Okay." So
Wow.
now I know kind of like what we're working with. And the thing is if you have such a rare disease, drug companies don't take an interest because they want to appeal to the majority of cases. And
Yeah.
so, he quit his job, he formed a nonprofit, he got to the scientists that are like the top of the field, like the LeBron James of muscular dystrophy scientists. And he's like, he compared his story to like Top Gun, like getting in the fighter jet. And he was like, "Look, we're going to be shot at. It's going to be bumpy, but I am driving the plane and we're going to survive this. We're going to survive this because I'm your dad." And I was like, "Oh my God, this guy pulled at my heartstrings." I don't think I've ever cried after an interview, and he did that
Wow.
for me. It was
Wow.
super powerful. Yeah. It was amazing.
So how did the episode go as far as its views and its consumption of that?
It didn't
Was that
go
a
viral
powerful
like
hook?
Reese's because, he didn't have the same kind of following. Like Reese
Oh,
has 20,000 subscribers on YouTube and she re-aired it on her channel and she understands how to use YouTube. But I feel
yeah.
like, I had a lot of people reach out to me and it reconnected me with people even that their own child had that. Actually, there was our very first friends in Chicago. We lived there for a decade. In the first apartment building that we lived in, my oldest son's first friend ended up getting muscular dystrophy. And she became like an advocate for her son, but then she kind of went through like PTSD. And we had not like a falling out, but we just like lost connection. And I feel like through covering this story, I was able to reach out to her and say, "Hey, this guy started a nonprofit. He has the same form of muscular dystrophy that your son has. Like, yeah, it was like a nice way for me to reconnect with her. It was just a very meaningful experience. And he's local. He came to my first podcast meetup, and the meetup was free. I got Riverside.fm to sponsor it. And I said, hey, this is a free event, but, check out this guy's nonprofit if you want to give back in a way. So not everything has to be viral. It's just like the people that need to hear it should hear it. And then I also shared it with David Hirsch of the Father to Father Special Dads community. And he has a whole podcast where he interviews fathers of special needs children. And he listened to his story. And, I had another girl, Lily Brash, on my show who, was told she was only going to live till 2 years old. And she's now 22, and she's done Guinness World Book record of climbing the furthest with anybody with muscular dystrophy and swimming the furthest. And she's worked with ultra marathon runners to achieve those things. And I was able to send it to her. So it was like, I was able to like deepen connections in my own circle, like through that story in a very meaningful way.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. It sounds like you've really been able to kind of carve into that personal connection, personal story, which is really connects with people, just like what I did, talking about a connection with my my grandmother that I never knew growing up. It's those personal things that increasingly all of us, I think, are striving toward making connections with, because it's very human, right? It's not superficial.
100%. Like, I was just at this trade show this past week, and I was a part of interviewing people that were at the trade show. And one of the sponsors of the booth that I was at, of course, he wanted to talk about what they did for a living and, his travel company and whatnot. But I knew that he was a dad of 2, and he was telling me that his daughter was into raising pigs. And then I was like, wow, I know nothing about that. And then we got into like pig insemination. I was like, I can't believe we're talking about this at the Offshore Technology Conference. But that was so interesting. And it's just like,
Yeah.
I've never heard that story. I definitely want to go there. What are the pigs' names? Right? Like,
let's
and
get
how does
personal
that-
with the pigs, right?
let's
Yes.
get personal with the pigs. And
Well, they're so smart, right? They're very intelligent creatures.
he said that too.
animals.
How do you know that?
That's what I'm told.
And
Right.
what was really interesting is, since he, travels to 80 countries a year, he knew a country where people pay to go see pigs swim. I was like, that's a thing? That's cool.
Wow.
And
Huh?
that came out. Yeah. So if somebody shares something just out there that like you've never heard, dig deeper into that. That is a uniqueness.
Yeah. I mean, if it's not something you ever heard of before, I mean, it may have been said before, but just not on your podcast. Right. And it's the same thing, I kind of think about that too when I do this show, is that I try and break the mold of typical topics around podcasting, because I've done so much of the typical topics. I like to kind of like pull back the onion a little bit deeper and get down to that inner layer, right, of human emotion and human connection, is the big thing around podcasting that doesn't get talked about enough, is how to speak to an audience. How do you kind of think yourself as you're doing your show, is part of the magic of doing this. But yeah, well, let's kind of transition over to let's get in and answer some questions here, Reena. Let's do a Q&A, and we can kind of clip through this, and that'll get us to the StreamYard giveaway toward the exact end of the program, so we can spend like maybe 5 to 10 minutes on the questions, and let's see what we can uncover here in the thread of conversation here that's been going on the show. While I've been doing it, I've been trying to capture these things, and it's going to go all over the map into some of the topics we've already talked about. But I'll bring up the first one here, and I haven't read through it because some of them can be a little bit long. But the comment is House of Light Ministries. Why am I getting this message? About trying to broadcast. I'm not sure why. I got that message too when I started this show. So that must be, it says an unexpectedly high kind of like traffic load has been happening on the internet or something like that. So, and please wait 30 to 60 seconds. So, and I waited like 30 seconds. Actually, what happened at the very beginning of the show and why I kind of got started a little bit late was because it was asking me to wait 30 to 60 seconds before I started again. So anyway, it didn't turn out to be a problem, but it's just one of those things that happens sometimes with technology. I've been around technology enough to know that it doesn't always work perfect. I don't know if you've had that experience, Reena, but that's been mine.
Oh, yeah.
And then Brampton Gardner writes, AI daddy sounds a little kinky.
That's actually hysterical because somebody messaged me on Podbean and they were like, if you would have named your show Better Call Dad, I would have been all in. But the fact that you call him daddy is a pass for me. And I was like, that sounds like you might have some daddy issues. You want to come on? Like,
what kind of daddy issues are they? Is the bigger question, right? Are they good daddy issues or bad daddy issues? Right. So well, thank you for the interesting comment that kind of
AI daddy. I think I got to play around with that.
I think so too. Maybe you'll have to clone your dad's voice and then you can kind of put words in his mouth.
Yes, yes. It's funny because I had this shirt that said, when mom says no, ask daddy. Now you can ask AI daddy.
Right, exactly. So, and this next comment is from let's go Sue with Joanne Branco. And question, please, may I have missed this, but do you answer negative comments or let it be?
That's a great question, and it kind of goes along with what I just said. When I first read the comment, like, hard pass for me because you said daddy and not dad. I thought about it for a minute, and I actually shared it with another podcaster, and he helped me have the right comeback. He was like, sounds like daddy issues to me. And so with negative comments, I'll either just say, thanks for the feedback, because I mean, every comment helps your engagement.
Yeah.
Or I do try to make light of it.
Yeah, and it also, like I did in the very first comment, I mean, I think to some degree, maybe that was a little bit of a comment about maybe some instability in the platform. And I do think that, we have to be honest about stuff like this. I mean, I think that being transparent with the technical struggles of any technology platform, I think is important for people to comprehend. I know it's been important for me over the years to just sit back, relax, don't get too stressed out about any kind of negative thing that goes on, and just kind of work your way through it and be calm about it and just be straightforward about it. It's not like it's the end of the world that there's a negative comment, but the negative comment there can be some grounds to it, right?
It can be insightful. I actually had a couple people on that interview I did with Reese tell me that my intro song was too long and that I should just start with the interview. And I was thinking that the audio podcast, maybe I should keep the song, my custom song, the Better Call Daddy song that I helped write, and that maybe YouTube is a different vibe. But at the same time, some people came to my rescue in the comments. They were like, hit fast forward, like other people actually responded to the negativity for me. I was like, oh, that's cool.
So so Square Table Degenerates has a comment in here too. It says, the best advice is to do what most people tell you not to do.
I love that.
I think that there's some truth there. And I do think that maybe, there's also some aspects of that maybe take what they say and evaluate it against your own experience. And if you want to make a change, based on that feedback, that's up to you. Take feedback wherever it comes from and for whatever motivation is, and just evaluate yourself. I think it's a personal responsibility thing to make those choices and not just based on what somebody tells you to do. Right.
100%. And that's why I'm glad I have my dad to bounce it off of, because he's also pretty level-headed.
And it looks like, let's go with Joanne Banco also writes, just be kind is always a good motto. you can be kind and disagree and be disagreeable, but at some it's at least some can and some can't. So I think I think that's good takeaway. I think some can do it and some can't do it. And I think it's each one of us kind of has to decide. I don't know what's your thought on that, Reena.
I think I've even talked about that with my dad. Like, can we agree to disagree? But
Yeah.
he says that if the other person is just flat out wrong, then he's just going to take a stance.
Right. Yeah.
He's like, I'm not even going to give you any credit with that.
And then Square Table Degenerates writes, if lots are engaged and watching, we keep going. But if people are dropping off, there's no vibe. So, should you just shut it down? And I do think it is an interesting point that this person raises, is that if your engagement drops with the content that you're doing, and I think you see this with the availability in the Apple Podcast platform, and then it used to be in Google Podcasts. I believe it's in Spotify now, where you can see where people drop off in their engagement in your content. And I think you can see it in YouTube as well, where people stop watching, right? At what kind of aspect of the show do they disengage? And I think it's an interesting thing as a content creator to keep an eye on, because there may be things that you're doing in the show that just lose people's interests, and that may be okay, or it may be not okay. I think it depends on what kind of show you want to produce. But I don't know, do you ever think about that with your show, Reena?
I do at the end of the month kind of like look at the titles and which ones got the most plays and how are my retention levels. So I do pay attention to that. But I think it also kind of goes back to like, are people still reaching out to me? Are people commenting? Are opportunities coming from this? Am I still enjoying it? Like, it's not just about the number of listens for me. Like, honestly, there's so many reasons for me to be doing it. It feeds my creativity. It's led to me meeting people in real life. It's led to speaking engagements. It's led to customers. So I don't need a zillion downloads on every episode. Like, not every topic is going to resonate. You know what I mean?
Right. It's going to vary. It's going to vary a lot.
And even this trade show, like I interviewed 4 people on the fly. I didn't prepare at all. I didn't know who I was going to interview. They didn't really know the format of my show, but I was like, hey, how did your parents play into your career? Or was your dad an influence in your life? Or give me a little of that so I can make it fit the format. But I think it's okay to mix things up and to test new things, especially if your audience doesn't expect like the same thing from you.
Right. Well, is it okay to have your audience kind of expect kind of like a similar format, where they can kind of look forward to something? I kind of have seen that with the giveaway that I do on this show, is that there's an expectation that I'm going to give these things away at some point in the show. So, maybe they stick around and watch a little longer.
I think they want my dad's reaction. I think they might skip
that's an
to
interesting point on that side,
Yeah.
on the content side.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting point. And Drink with Rick has a comment in here too that he shared with us. I've gone almost 3 hours on my show before, and he does a kind of like a alcohol review program, wine
Oh,
and
cool.
beer and stuff like that is what Rick does. And he keeps it going because there's viewers in the chat that keep commenting and asking questions and things like that. And he just keeps it going, and I've seen shows do that too. And that's happened with me on this show a couple times, where there was just so many comments and questions coming in that I went almost 2 hours with this show once. And that is kind of unusual. I usually only go like an hour and 15 or so, and then I kind of shut it down. But my tendency, at least with my experience with content, is that there's a lot of momentum that you get into around, especially with live programs, to go longer and to do longer content. Keep engaging with your audience if they're there and they want to engage and they are connecting at a deep level. And I think what Rick's talking about here is a good example of that. And I've experienced that too, and it's really interesting, that whole dynamic. And then Square Table the Degenerates also writes, Springer ruined things for a lot. Now regular guys have trouble getting guests because everyone thinks everyone wants to be Jerry Springer. I don't. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. I think that goes back to you can't make people what they're not. And I actually tried to do that. Like I had this one guest and she was so good at going after the crowd. And, they were calling her all kinds of names. And she was like, that's right, I am, and then I was like, oh my God, the crowd went wild for that. So then I tried to make somebody who was quiet do that. I think there's beauty in figuring out who that person is, each person is, and getting them to tell the story in the best way that they can tell it. You can't make everybody somebody who's going to yell at the crowd. You can't make everybody, a KKK member. You can't make everybody angry. Some people are weird. Some people are soft spoken. Some people are, completely random, and you got to figure out what is the best way for each person to tell their story and what their uniqueness is and bring that out.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's really ruined anything really for anyone. I'm not sure I agree 100% with that.
Yeah.
But I do think that I think in our current world today, I think extremes are probably even more predominant than even back in the Jerry Springer years. So I think there's more risk of more extreme behavior now than ever before.
What's interesting is in the beginning of my show, I thought that I had to tell those shock and awe stories. But honestly, I have found beauty in even the dad who quit his job and got himself into a conference and is like risking everything to give his son a fighting chance. And I think that a
Oh,
lot of people can relate to just a heartfelt, beautiful, emotional story too. It
right.
doesn't have to be actually wild and crazy. And, one of my best stories on Springer was a hate your mate story. It wasn't like a complicated story at all. It was just a mom who hated, her daughter's boyfriend. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be like some, I slept with your grandma and I'm sleeping with your mom too. I mean, that comes along on occasion and that's crazy. But like I said, the bread and butter of the show was just, I'm cheating on you.
Yeah, there's probably more people that can associate with that, or relate to it
Yeah.
somehow at a less extreme level. I think the more extreme you get, the more kind of niche it is, and it is
Harder to
kind of like,
relate to.
yeah, it is kind of like trying to watch being interested in watching a train wreck, right? Versus trying to watch like maybe a bike accident or something. It's
There's
less.
reels of that now.
Right, right. Well, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Um,
People actually laugh at like people hurting themselves. Like,
yeah, yeah. And then Tryon Learns Bikes writes in here, people will remember how you make them feel more than they will remember what you say. That's why
mm,
Fear Factor was so successful. So, yeah, I would tend to agree that the feelings part and emotions part is much more impactful than just the words you use.
yeah, I
So,
just recently interviewed a guy who was The Bachelor. He was also on The Bachelorette. That one's coming out soon. His name is Ben Higgins. And he was saying that a producer came up to him and was like, you are not giving us like anything personal. Like,
oh,
straight up told him that. Like, you need to like get vulnerable here. And that changed everything. And then once he like really started talking about feeling like an outsider and feeling like he couldn't find his place and was he even lovable, the crowd loved that. Like so many people could relate to
yeah,
feeling unlovable.
I
And that
think
was just so simple.
that's probably true. Yeah, I can see that. People can associate with that more than really anything else. So, I believe that's all of the big comments except for this one that the person can barely hear someone. I don't know if it's me or you or something like that, but occasionally I will drop my volume off, and so maybe it is hard to hear, but it also could be your volume on your end too.
I
So
can
who
hear
knows?
you and
Yeah.
me.
I can hear you just fine. You're blasting in my ears.
I loved all those comments though. That was fun.
Yeah, that was. And thank you everybody out there for all of the great comments. And well, let's get in and give away some merch here, Reena. So this is a regular thing that we do on this show. And so we have some entries, but if you wanted to enter, if you haven't entered yet, go into your viewing platform that you're watching this program live on and enter the hashtag the yard, just like the instructions on the lower part of the screen. And that will automatically get you entered into the giveaway here. So let me skip ahead here, and I will play a little bit of music here as we lead out of the show, and we'll give away some merch here. So let me come down here and click play, and looks like there's a bunch of other comments, looks like, that have come in. Let me make sure that I haven't missed anything important. So it looks like we've got, some entries that have come in. Looks like a couple people said that the levels were perfectly fine.
Hey, Jay Franzi.
You sound great. And another person entered. And then a person wrote, Dime Bag Coins writes, I miss the founders. Well, I understand that. It's the founders of StreamYard is who the person is referring to. Gage and Dan used to do a live program on Sunday evenings every week, talking about the platform and StreamYard. So that's what they were referring to. So let me go ahead and stop making typos, this person writes. Yeah. So it's not commenting, it's chatting. There you go. That's what we're doing here, is we're chatting, not commenting. That's a good point. Yeah. So, well, let's go ahead and give away. I think if everybody's had time to enter into the giveaway here. And this person
You are
thinks that they're
special.
special. So there you go.
What's your daddy story?
Right. All right. Well, let's go ahead and hit the draw button and see who's gonna win here. Let me pull it up on the screen, and you can see the giveaway tool, which is available to all StreamYard plans.
Cool.
If you just go to StreamYard.com. So after you've logged into your account, just go to StreamYard.com//giveaway. And that will pull up this tool that will capture all your entries into a giveaway. So let's go and hit the button, and we will find who the winner is here. All right, we're getting there close. We're getting there. Oh my goodness. Mutt Nuts Crazy Craft. I think Mutt Nuts won a few of these. So
I love it.
Yeah, I don't know if Mutt Nuts Crazy if we draw again, because you've won so many times in the past, but I don't know how many Puddles ducks that you actually need. But let's go ahead and pull another winner here. And see who comes up this time. Ladybug Stacker, you're the winner of the StreamYard Puddles Duck and StreamYard mug. So send me an email if you would like, and I will share my email address up on the screen, and you can get your email address and your mailing address sent to me, and we will get you the merchandise sent out to you as soon as the StreamYard team can get to that. So thank you so much, Ladybug Stacker. Thanks so much for watching the show. And I want to thank everybody else who's joined me tonight to watch the show. And Reena, thank you so much for being here with me.
It was a
great to
blast.
talk with you.
Congratulations to Ladybug Stacker.
Yeah, it's always good. So anyway, well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here with me. I think we made it to an hour and a half, Reena.
Woohoo!
So we did actually make it to the end of this. So, but anyway, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much. And I will be back from Seattle tomorrow or next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific with another podcaster. Christine Blackburn is my guest that's coming up, and she's been doing podcasting and live shows in LA for many years. So it'll be an interesting conversation about story and then also live on stage events for next week. So be back with me. Thank you so much, and good night, everybody. And Reena, good night to you too. Okay.
Good night. I'm excited about Seattle.
Yeah, I am too. All right. Bye.
Bye.